You're listening to certified financial planner Doug Goldstein, host of the Goldstein on Gelt Show, www.goldsteinongelt.com.
Okay, I'm very excited to have on the Goldstein on Gelt Show, John Ross. He's an estate planning and elder law attorney from Texas. He's also a former U.S. Marine. Actually, you may know him because he's got a show called The Big Picture Retirement, and his partner there is a fellow named Devin Carroll, who is a former guest also on the Goldstein on Gelt Show. If you missed that interview, like all the interviews we do, you can check it out at YouTube. Go to YouTube and look up Goldstein on Gelt and Devin Carroll. But John, what I understand is you are really the light of this relationship, the light of the Big Picture Retirement Show. Isn't that right?
I certainly think so. Yeah, absolutely.
All right, we won't tell Devin you said that.
That's right.
You know, one of the things that I know you can really talk about in a big way is estate planning. The problem is, I think a lot of times people go, oh gosh, estate planning. You know, what does that have to do with me? And I tell them, it goes all the way back to the Bible, right? Doesn't it go back to the story of Jacob and Esau?
Well, I often talk about the fact that one of the most common mistakes that we all make is just the failure to plan. We just don't do it. We know it's coming. We just don't do it. Probably one of the best examples of that is Isaac, who, had always intended to bestow his blessing on his oldest boy, Esau, his favorite, the man's man, the big hairy Esau. But instead of really going in and planning for that and setting things in motion, he waits until he's very old, anticipating death at any moment. He's blind. He's essentially bedridden. And by the time he actually gets around to saying, hey, Esau, go out there, hunt me some meat. Let's have one big meal and I'm going to bestow my blessing on you. Of course, Esau takes off as the dutiful son. Meanwhile, Rebekah, his wife, she overhears all of this and sends in her favorite, Esau's brother Jacob, and says, you know what? You need to get in there because you're about to lose out. You need to get in there and trick your father into bestowing his blessing upon you. Of course, Jacob, not a big hairy guy like Esau. So Rebekah's solution to this is she's going to wrap him up in some goat fur, send him in there. And, in our practice in dealing with the elderly, we talk about a stage in life where you're frail, vulnerable, but not incompetent. You still have your mind, but because of your frailties and your age, you're easily manipulated. And that's essentially what happens here. Jacob goes in, Isaac, all he can do is reach out and touch that fur and sure enough bestows his blessing on Jacob, thinking it was Esau the whole time.
And literally the rest is history.
And the rest is history.
So had you been, John, the elder law attorney who Isaac had hired at that time, what advice might you have given him?
First of all, I probably would have hoped that he would have come in well before something like this. And we would have talked about essentially planning for 3 phases in life. The first phase being that incapacity, setting up things that are going to allow whatever your wishes to be. One, you're protecting yourself from yourself. And also that you've got people that you do trust to follow your wishes in a position that they can assist you if you become incapacitated. And most people have a tendency to forget that part of it. They jump straight to a will. Here's what I want to happen when I die. And they forget that whole period of life and incapacity and goes with it. So we would have started there. We then would have talked about that transition at death. And then the third phase of this would be all of the stuff that, again, people have a tendency to hope for good things for their heirs. They want their kids to be healthy, happy, well-married, financially stable. And that's all great. That's what we hope for. What I encourage people to do, though, is plan for what you don't want to happen, which we generally refer to as the 4 Ds: death, divorce, disability, and debts. That's where the real value in the planning comes in, is you can plan for what you don't want to happen.
Well, yeah, I'm a careful planner, so I'm a big believer in that. We're talking with John Ross, who's an estate planning and elder law attorney based in Texas. He's given us a great, I wouldn't even necessarily say a metaphor, but a real historic example of when someone, Isaac from the Bible in this case, might have had something in mind, but it didn't work out because he didn't plan for exactly what he wanted to happen. In the end, it didn't really work out the way maybe he had intended. Of course, I think it kind of did work out the way God intended, but we'll save that for another day or for a different show.
Yeah, different show.
But as far as I'm concerned, it worked out pretty well in the end. But the issue that I really want to dive into here is this issue of incapacity, because all too often it becomes a very difficult conversation to talk to someone who is doing okay. You know, a guy's in his 60s or his 70s, and, he's fine. He's may still be even be working, and he's playing golf or tennis. And then you say, listen, I'm not so sure that you're always going to be at your best. What can we do in order to plan for this? And he says, well, I don't have to deal with this now. How do you address the kind of client who doesn't feel he has to deal with it now?
I think the first thing is just to point out some very real world examples that people have often already experienced. I will often say, have you ever tried to call your cell phone carrier to discuss the plan when in fact the account was originally set up in your wife's name? And you'll find out real quick that they're not going to talk to you. You have to get your wife on the phone. She has to then turn around and give permission for you for something as simple as just paying the bill. And most people have had that experience, whether it's the electric company, the gas company, the phone company, whatever it is. That's something they can immediately relate to. And then all you have to say is, now, what would you have done if your wife had had a stroke and could never speak again?
Got it. Wow, boy, man, you're good at this. All right, I could really get training. My day job is that I'm a financial advisor. So I specialize in people who live outside the United States. Basically, they live in Israel. And quite frankly, a lot of them are retired. I usually explain that the reason that we work mostly with retired people is they've been saving their whole life and they actually now have money to invest. But that's a very good way of explaining to someone. And the fact is, as soon as you started telling the story, I'm thinking the same thing happens to me, for my company. We've got a company here, and when the phone company needs to speak to us, they won't speak to the guy, my office manager, who's in charge of this, because they somehow think they need to speak to me, even though I have no idea how the phones work in the office. So I like that as an example. Now let's say you explain this to someone, you say to the client, we're concerned about your incapacity. What's the number one legal document that he should put into place in order to protect himself and his family?
For most people right there, we're going to be talking about a financial power of attorney, a written document that says, one, here's the person or people that I want to be able to handle these things for me. And then essentially get into all of the actual details of what powers you want them to have. Is it just something as simple as handling the phone company and the electric company and the insurance? Or does it need to be much more thorough and start getting into things like intangible assets, being able to deal with Apple and your iTunes account, for example?
Let me touch this a little bit, because one of the areas that, and with all due respect, you are a lawyer, and I think that lawyers often, my opinion of lawyers is very high, because I think that they can think at a very high level. And what you're describing is you say, listen, have a document, a legal document that you can bring anywhere and say, with this legal document, I have the right to speak on behalf of my wife or my father or my friend, and that should allow you to do it. If you actually go to a company, you go to a bank, let's say, or a brokerage firm, and you say, my brother assigned me his power of attorney, here's the document. Now I need to liquidate his account and wire the money somewhere else. They're not going to do that right away. They've got real procedures and systems in place to protect against fraud. So is it an easy system, or is there an easier system that you have in place where it can go a little more smoothly?
For the vast majority of people, having a financial power of attorney is a good idea. Now, when you really want to start getting into some more advanced planning, having, for example, you talk about like the banking and stuff. I have my financial assets in a trust. That trust then names successor trustees, people who are in charge of it. And that's much like, the trustee of a trust, much like the president of a company. Whoever that president of the company is, they have access to bank accounts, access to real estate, access to all the company's assets. And so if I have a trust that allows me as trustee to do whatever I want, but if I become incapacitated, then my good friend Doug Goldstein steps in, then you should be able then to walk into that bank with a copy of the trust and say, here's the trust, I'm now the trustee, and at that point you can do whatever.
I'll tell you what we do. I just want to give an example to let people know that A, I agree with what you're saying, because I think it's very important, but B, one of the things that people can actually do is they can speak to their bank or their brokerage firm, because this is something we do a lot. And I always tell clients, it's great that you have this document, the power of attorney, but our company itself has its own trading authority form or power of attorney form. Why don't you sign that as well? Because that will work all the time for our company. At least you've got one thing covered. You're not going to have to go and fight with the compliance department, because ultimately they're going to have to accept the document, and it just takes time. So my feeling is that it's so important to have the document, but there are other tools you can use along the way just to make sure the system moves smoothly.
Absolutely. And it's a good idea, especially while you're still capable of doing these things. Again, going over to your financial advisor, going over to your bank, you may find out at that bank, for example, there's one here in my hometown that just refuses to accept powers of attorney.
Right. What are you going to do? Sue them? It's crazy. I mean, you may be able to force them, but who wants to do that when someone's sick and you just want to get some money to pay the doctor's bills?
Exactly. So by going to that institution and saying, I've done some planning, I want to know what your policies are. Do you need a copy of this in advance? Do you have your own form, as many of the large brokerage firms do? Those sort of things. Yeah, always a good idea. The more you can do on the front end, the smoother it's going to be on the back end.
Absolutely. All goes back to planning. Hey, John, I see we planned way too many questions to ask you this episode. I hope I'll have you back to talk about more, but in the last few seconds, just tell people, how can they follow you and follow your work?
Well, as you mentioned, my co-host, Devin Carroll, he and I have a podcast called Big Picture Retirement. You can find on iTunes and all of those good places. I also have a separate company called Aging Insight, aginginsight.com. On that website, we have a television program that we do. We have a radio program that we do, and we also publish a magazine that discusses things like powers of attorney, trusts, special needs planning, lots of good stuff in there, and all of that's available on that website.
Okay, we will put a link to all of that at the show notes of today's show at goldsteinongelt.com. John Ross, thanks so much for taking the time.
I appreciate it.
You've been listening to the Goldstein on Gelt Show with money maven Doug Goldstein. Check out all of Doug's money ideas at goldsteinongelt.com. Doug specializes in helping people who live outside the United States handle their U.S. investment accounts. If you have a question that you would like answered on the air or off, contact Doug at his website or send him an email to doug@profile-financial.com.